thank you for joining us today to our really interesting conversation. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Melissa. I'm an event host for Power to Fly. I'm based in Buenos Aires. I'm from Argentina. And today we have so much to talk about that I don't want to waste any time. So let's go quickly through some of our guidelines before we begin. First of all, if you've joined one of these chats before, you know that we think of this as a conversation. So you can all turn your cameras on, you can participate, you can send your questions or comments. That said, I've muted you all by default, so we avoid any weird noises that can distract us, but please feel free to participate. We want your comments and questions. Regarding privacy, know that you won't appear on our live stream if you don't come off mute. And regarding your privacy, if you would like to remain anonymous, you can send your comments via chat box, but choosing my name from the drop-down menu instead of sending your message to all the participants. Also, remember that this session is being recorded, so you don't need to write down notes. You just need to enjoy the conversation, participate, and then a few days from today, you will receive an email with a link where you'll be able to rewatch this conversation. So let's move on. I'm really excited to introduce Devon. So Devon, can you please tell us a little bit more about your background, why you're here with us, what are you going to talk about, what are you going to share?
Sure, of course. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Devon Climer, and yes, I am a corporate speech trainer and a workplace communication consultant, and I'm actually a speech pathologist by degree. So I have a master's in communication sciences and disorders. So that's where I'm, very extensively trained in the science process behind communication. And I started off my career working as a clinician in the hospital systems. Here, I'm located in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States. And so I started working, in that setting. And, it was when I got into the real world is when I really, got a lot of exposure and experience with really the art of professional communication, which is truly, of course it's a science, but also, there certainly is an art aspect to it as well, just how to communicate with, in my case, working in the hospital with difficult, patients, having hard conversations, or, how to communicate in a way so that you can get buy-in, for an initiative you are trying to do system-wide, or, those are just a couple examples. So that's really where I got my first, taste of this. And, I became really fascinated with it, and started doing some research and taking on some private clients on the side, and it just kind of catapulted from there. And just recently, after I got back from maternity leave with my daughter, I went full-time with this, and the rest is history. So I am here to talk to you today about public speaking tips and tricks and strategies to implement, because I know firsthand, it is such a pain point for so many people, no matter your industry, no matter your experiences and things like that. It can be really a source of, just a source of nervousness and discomfort for a lot of people. So I am so excited to be here and talk about all of that today. Oh, Melissa, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry.
There we go.
That's because I'm really excited with this conversation. I was saying that I am really eager to learn everything you have to share with us.
Yay.
So these are today main takeaways. And for the sake of keeping it conversational, we've gathered up the questions you sent before the event, and we've ordered them in a flow that we think it's nice and smooth. But of course, please feel free to participate and add your questions and comments. So without further ado, let's begin. I'm there. I don't know if you're still seeing my screen. I think you're not, right?
Right. We just see you and now me.
Perfect. So let's begin with our first question, which is, what tools or self-speaking would you recommend to overcome the fear of public speaking?
I think this is something that is a really common question that I receive, quite often. And I think one of the biggest tools that somebody can implement, especially if you are feeling a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety over public speaking, is to really dig into normalizing that feeling. And, really just recognizing that it's totally normal to be nervous before speaking in front of others. In fact, it is, research shows time and time again, it is completely human nature to feel that way. So I think if you kind of take away a lot of, the mind drama out of it, that could then, catapult into a lot of other negative thoughts and feelings towards public speaking, and just kind of take that out and just normalize that this is something that many people deal with. And it's something that is so normal. I think that is a very useful, just overall way to reframe how you think about public speaking and just talking in front of others. And then, I do like to mention this because I think this is an important point too, but I read a quote once and I don't remember who said it, but it was something along the lines of, every time you speak is, whether it's to one person or 1,000, that's public speaking. And I think that's an example of how you can really, kind of talk yourself down off of a scary ledge when you think about public speaking. If you start viewing every conversation you have, even if, of course, outside of work too, start viewing every chance you communicate as a chance to hone and develop your public speaking skills, that kind of takes a lot of the scariness out and helps for it to kind of become more of a routine and more of something that you're able, to practice and get comfortable doing. So I think that's a really useful tool for people to kind of wrap their heads around when it comes to that.
That's great. I want to tell you that I'm really excited with this conversation in particular because I usually feel nervous when I have to do public speaking. So I'm really interested in everything you're saying.
Yes,
so
good.
You've shared with us like a general recommendation, but now people would like to know, do you have any specific activities that you think that can help to cultivate these skills we're speaking about?
Sure. I think, as I kind of alluded to before, treating every conversation as a chance to hone these skills. First of all, that's a way to kind of make it, like I said before too, not such of a huge, monumental type of thing. So treating just everyday conversations like public speaking is a great way to start out, but also start saying yes to opportunities that normally you may, back off of, or, sit on the sidelines. Start saying yes to things. If there are, just opportunities that arise, at work, and, they're looking for volunteers, and it doesn't have to be giving a presentation. Let's say, perhaps your organization is, volunteering, at a booth at some sort of event. Volunteer to just go and, be the person standing there and chatting with people. The more you kind of just get in that habit of saying yes and putting yourselves in, in experiences and opportunities that allow you to practice your speaking skills, that will help. And I see somebody suggested Toastmasters, which that is an incredible resource. And they, just have it nailed in terms of this type of thing. So that is certainly a resource to look into for sure. But, like I said, I think just starting to say yes and, kind of getting yourself used to that discomfort a little, because it will feel, uncomfortable and, just nerve-wracking a bit. But I think getting yourself used to that and kind of doing that more and more will really help in terms of conquering, that anxiety and fear that come along with public speaking, for sure.
Great. So someone said, I would love to know how you control the panic symptoms at the moment when speaking publicly.
Sure. And that's a great question. I think no matter, how experienced you are with public speaking, I think before anybody, gets on, to the podium about to give a presentation or something, you feel, your body reacting. And again, I just want to stress that that is normal. And what's happening is, just your autonomic nervous system kind of kicking into gear there and activating and, pumping that adrenaline through your system. So totally normal. And what I would say is it is so much easier to control your body with your body. So what I mean by that is, having some tools in your skill set when you feel like you are about to panic, it's easier to control it with some things such as breath work or movement. And I'll get into that. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of Andrew Huberman. He is a neuroscientist out of Stanford, and he's a researcher. He does incredible work. He has a podcast and is just first of all, he's an incredible communicator. He is so good at explaining really complex things in a way that's super accessible. So I would recommend him for everyone. But he talks a lot about breath work and, the correct way to actually do it when you are feeling super panicked and feeling like, really your nervous system is, kind of in overgear is to do a double inhale and then an exhale. So take a big inhale and then suck a little more in and then exhale through your mouth real deep. Doing that a couple times, you will notice really calms you down and kind of lets things relax a little bit. And then another really useful strategy too is movement. So just, to kind of give a brief, background here too, like I said, when you are feeling super nervous and anxious, it's like I said, that autonomic nervous system kicking into gear and adrenaline is pumping through you. And that adrenaline wants you to move. It wants you to move around. That's how it's designed. So you will find that if you move around and even just kind of rock back and forth or take some steps, in a way that, isn't super distracting, especially if you're in a room full of people, but maybe if you're off to the side or out in the hallway, just take, a few steps and just move your body a little bit. That will help relax you too, and will help alleviate those panic symptoms that you are feeling, especially in the moment. So that's breath work and movement are probably my top two recommendations for controlling those.
Devon, people is asking if you could repeat the name of the neuroscientist you mentioned.
Yes. And I'll pop him in the
can...
chat too. His name is Andrew Huberman. And Perfect. Like I said, he has a very useful podcast too, and is just an incredible researcher on things exactly like this. So he's great.
So everyone is asking for tips and advice. We have another question that says, what advice would you give to get rid of ruminating thoughts if someone overthinks everything during a presentation and it always works against them?
Sure. And, that's another very common theme that we see when it comes to public speaking. It's that idea of having to be perfect and having, whatever it is you're saying to come out exactly as you intended. It's just that perfectionism style of thinking that I think so many of us, myself included, are guilty of. And what I would say is probably the best way to look at this is to get yourself used to accepting a solid B performance. So just recognizing that it doesn't have to be perfect, and your audience won't know the difference between, an A or a B, especially, and we're going to dig into this too, you're providing value that will resonate with your audience. If you stumble or if you have a little mental block, and have to kind of start your thought over, that's okay. Accept the solid B and just recognize that as humans, we're not perfect. And when you are placed in scenarios that are stressful inherently, then you will stumble and just you will kind of have little mishaps and mistakes. I know I've already done it already in this presentation, and just knowing that that is human nature and just getting yourself used to recognizing it, and then say, okay, moving on, that's fine. And again, this is something that takes practice, but something that helps me even to this day as a speaker is just learning to accept a solid B. And I think that resonates with a lot of people, that it doesn't have to be perfect.
So you just mentioned a mental block. Many of us feel that. So do you have any tips or advice to get over a mental block while someone is public speaking?
Sure, for sure. And I think this often happens a lot too, and comes up a lot when it's question time at the end. You might feel like, oh my gosh, like my brain is totally empty. I have no idea how to answer this question. Or, during your presentation, you just kind of go blank a little bit. Just don't be afraid to take a pause. Take a pause and take a breath. I know just from, watching speakers and, studying them and things like that, that the best speakers aren't afraid of a little silence and aren't afraid to recollect themselves if they get thrown off a little bit. So don't be afraid to pause and take a breath if you have to. And something else that I think is really helpful, well, first of all, if you have slides, that kind of helps you, if you have a slide deck, to kind of get you back on track. And, if you get a little off track, then just go back to whatever's on your slides, in a presentation. So that's just kind of a visual cue that you can have that can help you overcome, a block during a presentation. But, as it pertains to perhaps answering audience questions or things like that, especially if you are just stumped by the question and just need a minute to think, repeating the question back is a really useful strategy. And honestly, this is, to what I teach people with interviewing too. It's very similar. If you are stumped a bit by a question, repeat it back. It gives your brain a little bit of time to kind of collect itself and to take a quick second. And, don't be afraid to say, like, I just need a minute, I need a second, let me think about this, and then get your words out there. Again, a little pause, a little break. There is no shame or no harm in that. The most experienced speakers do things and use strategies like that too. So mental blocks happen, and just, getting back on track, either via a visual cue that you may have in your slides, or by just giving yourself a quick pause, a quick break to collect yourself. That's totally fine. And, too, I always like to mention that if you do get a question that you really don't know the answer to, it's okay to say that. And it's okay, to recognize that that's something that you can look into and, perhaps bring up something that you do know that is similar. But, perhaps that particular question is an area that you need to research a little further. And, I think that's something that the best leaders really do and implement. So there's no shame in that either. Absolutely.
So our next question is, how do you make the right impression and connect with your audience right from the start? Are there common lines or tips to start with?
Sure. And I love this question, because I think that is what is on a lot of people's minds when, you are thinking about giving a presentation or, having to give a speech of some kind or leading a meeting or things like that. So I love this question. And what I like to say here is that one of the most essential qualities of a really good communicator and a good presenter is they are compelling to listen to. The information that they are talking about is interesting to the audience, to your listeners. So you have to be compelling in what you are saying to your listeners. And also you have to say it in a compelling way. So you have to be interesting to listen to. So I think one of the best ways to open up a presentation in a compelling and interesting way is via storytelling. I think that's a really good strategy and just a great way to open up any type of presentation really is by telling a story. People are automatically drawn to stories. And I think it's just, if you can find a connection between a story that you may have and your main message that you are wanting to get across to your listeners, then that's like a perfect way to start any type of presentation is with a story, just because those are just, again, what we're thinking of here is you want to have compelling information in what you're speaking about, and you want to say it in a compelling way. And storytelling really does bring out, just naturally, it brings out more facial expressions, more personality, more gestures as you're talking, just the 3D dynamics of presenting that really make a difference when it comes to confident communication and confident presentation skills. So storytelling, I think, would be my biggest recommendation for that.
Great. So another question we received is, what strategies do you have you used to cater to the needs of your audience?
Sure. And, that is a great question. And I think this kind of goes hand in hand when it comes to coming up with what you want to say in a presentation or in, a meeting, whatever it is. I think the most important thing to do is to think about your audience and ask yourself questions like, why is my audience here? Why are they here? What are they looking for? What kind of value can I provide? What experiences do I have that would be interesting to them? What knowledge do I have that would really resonate with my audience? So I think just keeping what you believe best is what your audience is looking for, and what they would find most valuable is what, the biggest, game changer will be for this. So I think just keeping in mind and asking yourself those types of questions, such as, like what are they looking for? What exactly are, they wanting to get out of, what I'm saying, and what kind of value can I provide to them? I think those are the biggest things when it comes to thinking about really the needs of your audience.
Great. I want to remind to the audience that you are invited to participate, so please share any question you want to ask Devon. So I will continue with the ones that people sent before the event. What are the steps to craft a message, and what are ways to adapt your message to your specific audience?
Sure. So this, I think, fits perfectly, honestly, with the last question. I think the first step you should do when it comes to crafting your message that pertains to your audience is to ask yourself those questions that I just laid out, and think of that then as your main message, kind of the North Star of your presentation. And that's what you want to keep coming back to and kind of thread it in throughout your presentation. So ask yourself those questions. What is my audience looking for? Why, do they want to listen to me? What can I provide to them of value that would really resonate? And craft your main message from that. And then from there, once you have your main message that is filled with value for your audience, you want to create a very clear beginning, middle, and end of a presentation. And again, all while kind of weaving that main message in throughout the conversation, throughout the presentation. So, and this is something too, like I said, opening up with a story that really kind of leads into your main point is a great way to open, or, ending your presentation with a really useful quote, or again, even a story or something that is just a very natural closing conclusion that pertains to your main message. Those are things that you can certainly do, and it makes it a bit less cumbersome when you think of coming up with a presentation with just focusing on your main message first, and then kind of separating it out into a beginning, middle, and end, and including relevant details, as needed throughout. And, also I like to say here too, I think a really important thing to remember when presenting and when, just when communicating in general, even, is being concise is really important. So, thinking about how, when you're crafting your presentation and your message and the details that go along with it, think about how you can say it in a short and simple way so that you don't lose your audience, because as humans, our attention spans are short. They just are. And especially, via virtual presenting and things like that, that's, kind of a whole nother ball game too. So I think just thinking of ways to make it as concise as possible is an important note. And also my other big recommendation would be to be sure that as you are crafting, what you're going to say, use simple language. Presenting is a time to teach and to inform and to tell stories. It's not a time to impress. So you don't have to feel like you have to use, big jargon filled, words and language, and especially you want to be sure that you're using language that your audience is readily able to understand, and so that they can fully take in what it is that you're saying. So I think that's an important note to make too, is just being sure that you are being concise in your messaging, and also just using the language and the simplicity of it, so that you can really just have your audience focus on what you're saying without being distracted.
So for our next question, I know you've anticipated some of these things I'm gonna ask, but I wanna ask the question in case you wanna build on that. It says, what are some tips and tricks that someone can implement to maintain the confidence needed when tackling public speaking?
Sure. And yes, I love this. I think a great strategy for really maintaining that confidence is you first have to tackle your mindset around it. So you have to really get used to, honestly, it's a little bit like cognitive retraining, kind of reframing the thoughts that you may have surrounding public speaking, and just think of ways to come up with more useful and helpful thoughts around your ability to present, because you can do it. And I think that's something that a lot of people aren't, always believing in themselves about. So I think tackling how you think about public speaking is probably the biggest, hack to really conquering this. So thinking too, just about common thoughts that you may have surrounding public speaking, just some examples of things I hear from clients often are, thoughts such as, well, I'm not a natural communicator. I wasn't born, able to communicate well, or, I'm an introvert, or I'm not as good as a speaker as he or she, things like that I think really come up for a lot of people, and is just kind of manifested in these ways of thinking, and kind of mental barriers, like, just like a scarcity mindset almost, and imposter syndrome, I know, is very, very common, myself included, when it comes to, speaking. And I think, again, just recognizing those types of thoughts that you may have surrounding how you feel about yourself as a communicator, and just learning to reframe how you think about yourself and the value you provide. Whether it's just coming up with some affirmations that work for you, and that you can have maybe around your computer or in your planner as just little reminders, or even just like I said, I think too, the more you do it and the more you kind of get your reps in with speaking, that helps to really build that confidence too. So I think that's an important point, as well as just, kind of getting your experience and working the kinks out as they come. I think that's helpful for many.
Great. So Casey asked a question before that was,
Sure.
can you, about what you said, can you give an example of what might be contained in the middle and end of a presentation?
Oh, sure, of course, yes. So, like I said, I think having your main message is a great way to think of your overall theme and takeaway that you want to have when it comes to giving a presentation, no matter the length. You want to have your main takeaway message in mind. And then what I personally like to do is just kind of do a brain dump and like bullet points. Like I just usually open up a Google Doc, honestly, and just kind of get all of my thoughts out there, and then think of a way that I can organize it in a way that makes sense. And keeping in mind a beginning, which usually I start with a story that has to do with my message. And then the middle is when I really get into the details that have to do with whatever it is that I'm saying, whatever the topic is. And I kind of just separate it out into little chunks of, just common themes that I can touch on and include the relevant details, as concisely as possible. So I would say the middle is when you kind of get into really the detail part of your presentation that, again, has to directly do with your overarching main message that you want the audience to ultimately walk away remembering. So include whatever necessary details in a concise and simple way. That's kind of the middle section where you kind of, get into the nitty gritty a little bit. And then to close out, I think it's a really useful strategy to circle back to your main points and just kind of, briefly touch on what it is that you talked about. I think we know just in, research in memory and learning, circling back is a great way to ensure that your audience will then remember what it is and actually store the information and absorb it a bit better. So I think going back to your important points and, just kind of touching on your overarching themes a bit would be a really nice way to end. And then, like I said, ending with either another little story or a quote or, our own personal experience, things like that, I think is a great way, to kind of leave your audience really with something that resonates and is memorable, because ultimately, like I said, is a good and effective communicator is compelling, and part of that comes with being memorable so that your audience can retain what it is that you're saying. So I love this question. Thank you for asking that. So I think, like I said, including some details in the middle and then just kind of coming back to main points at the end is a great way to conclude.
Okay, so someone mentioned, is there a way to look confident even though we are freaking out while we are speaking?
I love this question because I think a lot of people experience this and is something that they want to know. So I love this. And the answer is yes, there are ways to certainly look confident. And with that, you will find you'll feel more confident too. And this is through your nonverbal communication. So think of things like body language, facial expressions, eye contact, things like that. That's how you bring in the confidence. And that's how really you add personality and add dynamics, which I really believe just naturally calms you down as well. When you feel like you are being more yourself and you are feeling more relaxed, that helps to, just calm you down and helps to bring some personality and just kind of some 3D, quality to what it is that you're saying. So I think some of the most important aspects of nonverbal communication when it comes to presenting, I think one of the most important is using movement. And this would be more so if you are in person presenting, whether it's, at, a big conference or, just some type of work presentation. Using movement is so useful and, in my opinion, so underutilized often, but it is just such a great way to really, just not only relax your body, as I touched on before, because just what we know based on research is using that movement helps to really bring you down when your system is really kind of getting into that fight or flight mode. So using movement to your advantage is so useful. But also, I think it is just a great way to add some dynamics to your speaking. And what I like to tell people is just, especially if you are in person presenting, even if there's a podium, you don't have to use it. Imagine there's an imaginary arc in the room. And what I love is when people present, they start at the center of the arc, and then they kind of work their way around to the left and then come back to the middle whenever you're making a big point or something that you want your audience to remember, and then slowly work your way around the other side of the arc and kind of do that throughout the presentation. I think not only is this a fantastic way, like I said, to calm your body down, but it is such a great way to really feel and be perceived as confident by your audience. So I would use movement to your advantage for sure. And this one kind of goes with that a little bit, but certainly is more applicable, to even virtual presenting, but use eye contact. That is one of the best ways to really come across as confident and knowledgeable and, just really wanting to connect with your audience. And what I like to tell people is I think the sweet spot for eye contact is about 3 to 5 seconds. So think of like 1 to 2 sentences. Lock eyes with somebody and then move on to somebody else. Or if you're presenting virtually, kind of look at the camera and then avert, your eye gaze elsewhere, because also it's not natural to just be like locking eyes with somebody and not moving your eyes at all. So you want it to be natural, but really, kind of locking in your eye contact with members of your audience is a great way to communicate in a really confident, effective way, especially when it comes to like when you are making main points that you want people to understand. Use eye contact to your advantage. And then I would say, if I had to pick, one more big one that really communicates confidence, I think it's gestures. I think using gestures, so what you can do with your hands and your arms, is such an amazing supplemental way of communicating confidently. And, I think it adds, even virtually, it adds more of a just dynamic quality to your verbal communication. And what I like to tell people is you do want to kind of keep it at your center a little bit and kind of move out a little bit, but you don't want to be going all over the place and being too grand with your gestures. You want to kind of pack it in a little bit and use it. Certainly if you are doing virtual presenting, you don't want your gestures to be going off screen and things like that. So try to keep it, kind of centered around, your chest, your head, your shoulders, things like that. But I think that is a great way to communicate confidence, even if on the inside you're feeling super nervous. So I would say movement, eye contact, and gestures are kind of the big 3 for sure. I love that question.
And the answer was also great. Thank you for all those tips.
Oh, yeah.
So if we feel that anyone is paying attention, what do you recommend to do in those cases?
So if people aren't paying attention, is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
if we lose their attention.
Sure. That's a great point. And I think especially in this now very virtual or hybrid, models of working. I think that's very common. So what I like to do, especially, I'm just going to kind of focus on virtual presenting for a sec. I think getting people to participate in chat is a great way to kind of wake everybody up and kind of pull everybody back in and get a little bit of participation. So asking people to, just quickly, pop an answer into chat, if something is resonating or share an experience or things like that, just asking people to participate, I think is a great way, especially virtually, but even in person, if you feel like, you're kind of losing your people, asking a quick question or, asking people for a show of hands or just, kind of pulling your audience back in with some participation is a great way to kind of, get that attention back, because it is hard. And that's why I think truly, being concise, again, I feel like I keep coming back to that, but I think that is just, kind of the main thing here is why being concise in your messaging and is just so essential in terms of, the ultimate value and impact you make on the people you are speaking to. So just keeping that in mind as you are coming up with your presentation material and things like that is really important. But yeah, I would say my biggest recommendation, if you feel like people are fading, is just to get them involved and, to ask just for a bit of participation, I think is a great way to kind of get it back on track.
Great. So we have another great question. I'm particularly interested in this one. What advice would you give to non-native speakers when speaking in public? And how can we overcome the language barrier that is causing us to feel insecure and anxious?
Sure. And, I think this is something, again, that, I've had clients, I've worked through with this, and I think it's just a really common. So no shame in anything, with this at all. I would say, one of the biggest things when it comes to presenting, and this goes, for anybody too, is you want to be extra aware of your rate. So how fast you are speaking. And I think especially for non-native English speakers, using a rate that perhaps is a bit slower, but still, keeping it natural. We don't want it to be too slow so that it's not as natural. But using a rate that is slow will help your audience for sure. And even, I think just repeating, your main message. And again, this goes for everybody, but especially for this particular group, repeating your main message throughout, just so that you ensure that people are understanding, what it is that you are driving home and want people to remember. I think that's a real good strategy too. And, what I like to tell people too is, don't be afraid to say, like, if you stumble over your words, it's okay to acknowledge it and to even use a little humor through your presentation and, things like that, because that will naturally help your nerves, help calm you down, but it also get, people laughing and, in a way, obviously that is not negative, but I think when you use humor throughout a presentation, I think that's a great way to just acknowledge, what you're feeling and help, your audience kind of connect with you even more. So I think if you stumble, or if, perhaps you're just having a harder time than you thought you would, just recognize it and make a little joke. I think that's totally appropriate. And I think could be a great way, like I said, to really create a connection with your audience and in turn help calm you and relax you a little bit, because it's just human. We're humans. So I think that's something that, can really just help people in always remembering, for sure.
That's great advice. I will keep that in mind.
Good.
So, what advice would you have given to yourself when you spoke publicly for the first time?
I love this question, and I have never gotten this question before. I think I would tell myself that I think for me, my biggest hurdle that I had to get over when it came to public speaking was the idea of, I just had a lot of imposter syndrome. And, I think that's something that a lot of people have. So for me, I think telling myself that, I am capable and deserving and, I have a voice and a message that others need to hear. I think that's something I would have stressed a lot more and would have helped, in terms of kind of taming my nerves a bit, because I think, like I said, I think that's something that many, many of us struggle with. And as a speaker and, someone, and, I like to say, I am not a natural. I am an introvert through and through, which has really, not a, it is not make or break when it comes to public speaking. I like, to kind of say that, but, for me, it took a lot of getting over that imposter syndrome. So I think just telling myself that my voice, there's a reason that people want to hear me and people want, to listen, and just focusing on the value that, is unique to me. I think that's something that would have really been helpful and would have helped, kind of calm my nerves a bit more. I love that question. So thank you to whoever asked that. I love that.
So what should we do if we notice that we have misquoted or mistaken a talking point? Are there any tips or keywords to correct it immediately without losing credibility?
Sure. And, again, I think there's no shame in that, in just recognizing that, just saying, oh, I misspoke there. What I meant to say was, so, and then just go right into it. I think, just don't make it a huge deal. That's a lot. Honestly, that's like a lot of what I teach is I think when you just kind of recognize it and, point it out, but then just move on and, correct it in a way that's just kind of quick to the point and then move right on. I think that's the best way to handle that because that happens. Like I said, we're human and, it's impossible to remember everything and to get everything perfectly. So I think, just really recognizing and, just saying, quickly like, oh, I believe I just misspoke there. What I meant to say was so and so, and then just, continue on. I think that's the best way to handle that. Good question.
Another question we received is, do you recommend vocal exercises or mock scenarios? Could you share some resources and examples to prepare yourself in this sense before a presentation?
That is a great question. I do recommend, just kind of warming up your voice before you present, but obviously in a way that's not overdoing it because, you don't want to have, especially if you're presenting first thing in the morning, you don't want to have that, morning kind of gravelly characteristic to your voice. So I think just warming up and, even I think humming is a great way to warm up your vocal cords. And that's something even that I used to do with patients in the hospital who were just learning to speak again. Humming is a great way to really just get those vocal cords moving. So especially if you are, let's say, already in the conference room and people are coming in, you can just kind of quietly, hum to yourself. I know it might sound a little silly, but more than likely people won't hear it. And it's just a way to kind of warm up a little bit. So that would probably be my biggest recommendation, is just to do a little something, but don't feel like you need to kind of have a list of exercises or things like that. But, I think with that being said, I think it is important to ahead, when you are practicing your presentation, just being aware of, the tone of voice that you use, or, the just, how you vary your voice, because that is a very well studied aspect to public speaking, is those who, vary their voice a lot. So meaning you kind of go up and down in your actual tone of your voice, that is what really makes somebody interesting to listen to. So I think really practicing that as you go through and practice your presentation ahead of time, and just think of ways that you can kind of vary that your pitch and your tone a little bit, is, something that is for sure worth practicing. And, I know for me, I naturally have a higher pitched voice. And so I've had to practice, not necessarily like bringing it way down, but just, using my voice in a way that isn't distracting, and is something that is easier for others to listen to, because sometimes higher pitches can be harder for others to hear. So, and that's kind of a little bit extreme, and that's more so when it has to do with those who have hearing loss, or especially our elderly population. But it is important, and something that I've had to practice and really develop just through my career. So I think just being aware of your natural pitch of your voice, and just really being aware and practice using a varied tone, is something that will be very useful and very effective when it does come time for you to present. So I love that question.
So another one we have is, what was the biggest challenge you faced when speaking publicly?
I think as I kind of said before, I think for me, it was really that imposter syndrome, and feeling, kind of like questioning if I belonged and if I was worthy even. So I think that's something that really, I've had to work on. And even too, as I just said too, just working on my intonation and on my pitch is something that has taken me a lot of practice, and maybe, more practice than others. And really just something that I've had to really put deliberate effort and, just like I said, I've had to practice that quite a lot. So I think that's been a challenge for me as well. And then probably lastly, I think it's always hard. I think no matter who you are, it's nerve-wracking getting up in front of people, especially a big crowd. And I think just learning to calm your body down takes practice, and takes just a lot of exposure and a lot of experience. So I think that's been probably one of the biggest challenges, speaking in front of a larger crowd, and just learning how to relax my body and just recognize my nerves in a way that's as nonchalant and kind of just as casual as possible, so that I don't let my mind take over and lead me down a whole myriad and kind of the whole cycle of negative thoughts. So I think definitely just that practice and exposure to putting yourself in uncomfortable situations has been something that I really have had to get my own experience with. So it's totally normal.
Well, thank you very much, Devon, for sharing all your tips and advice. It has been a wonderful conversation. So how can the audience connect with you in case they want to?
Of course. So I hang out on LinkedIn the most. So you can find me there, just Devon Climer. And I think it's spelled out at the beginning of the presentation. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram at Devon Climer. And you can send me a message, hello@devonclimer.com. And I'm happy to connect with you. And yeah, like I said, I think I hang out the most on LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most active. So please, feel free to connect with me, or, follow me when I'd love to have conversations. So thank you so much for your time and your outstanding questions. And I was really happy just with the conversations that we had. And I hope that you all, got some value out of what I spoke about today. So thank you.
Thank you. And before we wrap up, I would also like to thank everyone who tuned in today, either here on Zoom or on our live stream via YouTube, our website. Hope to see you all again soon, and have a nice day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.